It is arguably the most intriguing maritime disaster of all time, and a century on tales, both tragic and inspiring, continue to be told of that fateful night when the so-called unsinkable Titanic did the unthinkable and sank. The 100th anniversary is being commemorated in a local exhibition revealing the stories of some South Australians who were either on board or, here's the mystery, at least claim to be. Caroline Winter reports.
Titanic itself seems to be an emblem of human endeavour, what can be accomplished. It was so big and it was so grandiose and it was so fabulous and so many people had worked on it. And it was this real emblem of an age, a real highlight to what could be accomplished.
It was the hottest ticket in town and around 2,000 passengers and crew had one. From the super rich and famous who travelled in first-class comfort to those looking for a fresh start.
We always forget about the thousands of third-class passengers on Titanic coming from all over Europe and further abroad, from Poland to the south, who were setting off on this transatlantic voyage to make a new future for themselves.
With much fanfare, Titanic set sail on April 10th, 1912, bound for New York City on its maiden voyage. But it would never arrive. More than 1,500 people died after the so-called unsinkable ship hit an iceberg in the North Atlantic and slipped beneath the freezing waters.
You can just think of wreckage floating in the water, dark, people screaming, dying, having to listen to that. It's just something that would have been with you for the rest of your life.
Sadly, it was for about the 700 mostly women and children who survived. Stories of tragedy and triumph touched all corners of the globe, and as always, there was an Adelaide connection.
One of the most famous is that of Evelyn Marsden, who was born at Stockyard Creek, north of Adelaide, in 1883. She trained at the Adelaide General Hospital as a nurse, which was the hospital before the RAH.
Evelyn Marsden was 28 when she joined the Titanic crew as a nurse and stewardess.
Evelyn shared a room with another stewardess, and they were adjacent to stateroom C-127. She actually was rescued from Titanic in lifeboat number 16.
Shortly after, she married Dr. William A. James, and they returned to Adelaide and moved to the Mansions Apartments in Pulteney Street.
They did actually live in this building here. So it's a visual link for Adelaideans to recognise this Titanic person and where they lived in their own hometown.
And a really iconic building.
A very iconic building. It has a vibrant life today.
Arthur Gordon McRae also came from Adelaide. He was born and raised in the city by a wealthy family before moving to Sydney to study.
He had kind of an interesting life too, working at a copper mine in Siberia, and then booked a second-class passage on Titanic. He unfortunately did not make it. He died, and his body was recovered by the cable steamer Mackie Bennett.
Arthur McRae tried in vain to save his valuables and was found wearing a diamond and emerald ring, gold links and 2 watches. Mr McRae and Evelyn Marsden were on the official passenger and crew lists, but other South Australians claimed they too were aboard the doomed liner. At Aldinga Uniting Church Cemetery, another McRae family is laid to rest. Among them, Mr Alan McRae, who was born in 1889 and died in 1912.
It's listed on the gravestone and it says, "Missing SS Titanic." But again, no listing of this gentleman on anything to do with Titanic.
And his isn't the only mystery.
There's a gentleman named John Beatty Butler, who actually died in 1970, I believe, and said he was on Titanic, but there's no evidence of him on the crew list or the passenger list.
In an article by the Advertiser in December of that year, John Beatty Butler, described as the last Australian survivor, relived the night.
After 58 years, I can never see a Salvation Army band or hear one without taking off my hat in reverence and respect to that gallant army of Christ's chosen who stood on the sloping decks of RMS Titanic praising God as they went down.
100 years after the sinking, Titanic's spell is as strong as ever.
I have to be passionate about it because Titanic has formed such a large part of my life since I was 26. It's been there.
In 2005, as a graduate student and archaeologist, Emily Jattiff dived on the wreck as part of film director James Cameron's expedition Last Mysteries of the Titanic.
It looks like a moonscape. And then all of a sudden, you see this ship sort of come out of the gloom. It's very weird. And you think, oh my gosh, that's the Titanic.
Now she is drawing on that experience to curate a local exhibition to mark the 100-year anniversary.
We believe this model belonged to a local shipping company and would have been used as a promotion for their brand spanking new lifeboats that will save your life in any kind of disaster.
Other objects include a photograph of the grand ship during its final preparations before the voyage.
This included staterooms from Regency period to Louis XVI, silverware, napkins, plates, all that sort of jazz.
For White Star Line, Titanic and its sister ships marked the next step in sea travel.
They've got a lot of forward thinking or forward hoping there, and that there will be regular sailings from Liverpool, Queenstown to New York.
But instead of regular sailings, Titanic would become a tragic legend. The question now is what next for the ship of dreams?
I think we have to come to a decision about where we're going to go from here in terms of science and exploration of Titanic. Is it appropriate to continue to retrieve stories from the wreck, or do we just need to decide to let it go?
Great story. The Titanic exhibition at the Maritime Museum opens on March 24th, and they want to hear from any descendants of the South Australians linked with the ship.